Okay, so today we're looking at factoring. The first step in factoring is to always factor out the greatest common factor, if there is one. There's not always a greatest common factor, but if there is, we factor it out. We call that the GCF. As a side note, if your first term is negative, you're going to factor out a negative along with the GCF. So here is our first example, 4x squared minus 28x. The GCF of 4 and 28 is 4, and the GCF of x squared and x is x. We factor out the 4x, and then we open up parentheses to see what do we need to multiply by 4x to get 4x squared minus 28x, and that's x minus 7. Now we're on our second example. What is the GCF of 7 and 21? You can divide, it's what can you divide them both by? You can divide them both by 7. And remember I said a lot of times it's going to be the smallest number up there. Not every time, but a lot of times it is. So 7, and then we have n squared and n. So what do we put for n squared and n? N, and then p and p, they both have a p. So our GCF is 7np. But if you remember the little note that we made under GCF, if the first term is negative, we factor out a negative with the GCF. So we're going to factor out a negative 7np when we do this. So you write your GCF on the outside, and then you put your parentheses opened up to get the other factor. So you put your GCF on the outside, open up your parentheses, and put your other factor in there. What do I have to multiply negative 7np by to get this term? It just needs an n. What do I have to multiply negative 7np by to get a positive 21np? A negative 3. If you have a hard time doing that in your head, go through and divide both terms by the GCF. Put the quotient in the parentheses. So 21np divided by negative 7np, 21 divided by negative 7 is negative 3. N cancels out, p cancels out. That's how we got that. When you're done, check and make sure that your answer doesn't have a GCF. This is my answer, but make sure there's not a GCF left. And there's not, so we can call it quits. Okay. Okay, so on this problem, we have 4 terms, and we're told to factor. When you have 4 terms, you are going to factor by a process called grouping. And you do just what it sounds like you do. You group terms together that have a common factor. So I'm going to group together the first 2 terms, 15a squared minus 5ab, and then the second 2 terms, negative 18ac plus 6bc, because these have a common factor, these have a common factor. In between them, I'm going to put a plus sign just so it doesn't look like I'm multiplying them together. Yes. They don't have to have the same letters, but they have to have some kind of common factor. So like this one has 5 and A. This one has 6 and C. You could, but I'm going to show you why I did it that way. I'm going to show you why I included the minus with this. All right, so what you do now, after you group them, if you want to write out steps, like the first step is going to be group. The next step is going to be take out the GCF of each group. So back to what we've been doing. We're going to take out the GCF of this group. What is the GCF of 15a squared and 5ab? 5a. So you write the GCF on the outside. And then we say, what do I have to multiply 5a by to get 15a squared? And what do I multiply 5a by to get negative 5ab? Okay, so there's what you get. We're going to do the next one. So then we go to the second group. All right. 18 and 6. What's the GCF? 6. And then they don't both have an A, but they both have a C. If you'll notice, this first term, now negative 18 is the first term. So we're going to factor out a negative with our GCF. And so that is why I put the negative in the parentheses. You wouldn't have to, but I did. Yeah, okay. So the GCF of 18 and 6 is 6. That's where the 6 came from. They don't both have an A, but they both have a C. So C is part of the GCF. Okay? Then, because our first term in this group is negative, we put a negative with the GCF. All right. So, when I take out the GCF here, I'm left with 3A. And when I take out a negative 6C here, I'm left with negative B. So, we would call this, I'll just put GCF each group. So we'll take out the GCF of each group. Now, what do you notice about our two groups now? Good. They both have 3A minus B. So guess what? 3A minus B is a common factor for these two. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 3A minus B, just watch, we're going to take 3A minus B out of this one and out of this one. When I factor 3A minus B out of this term, what's left? 5A. When I factor 3A minus B out of the second term, what's left? Negative 6C. And that's my answer, y'all. If I go back and I FOIL 3A times 5A, that's 15A squared. 3A times negative 6C is negative 18AC. Negative B times 5A is negative 5AB. And then last times last, negative B times negative 6C is positive 6BC. So that's how you can check yourself. You can go back and distribute. We call it FOIL sometimes. And you can check yourself. Now we're looking at how to factor a trinomial. We can do it by grouping. The only thing is we only have 3 terms. So we are going to rewrite the middle term. Okay, we're going to rewrite this 7x. Okay? How do we know, how do we write it? Do we write it as 1 plus 6 or 10 minus 3 or how do we rewrite the 7? That's what we're trying to figure out. This is the key. You multiply the first number times the last number and get negative 30. So that's first times last. Okay? You're going to multiply first. You don't have to take notes on this. Oh, no, at all. You can just write the answer when we get done. Okay? Because I'm going to show you the short way to do it. So, first times last is negative 30. Then we want to know what multiplies to negative 30 and adds to 7. So we think about all the things that multiply to 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Now because it's a negative 30, one of those will be negative and one of those will be positive, and it has to add up to a 7. So which of these can add up to give us 7? If we make the 3 negative, we have negative 3 and 10. So what I would do is in place of the 7, so I'll keep the 6x squared, I'll keep the negative 5, but in place of the 7, I'm going to write negative 3x and positive 10x. Now I have 4 terms, and now I can group. See how simple that was? We're just combining everything we've done today. So, the trick is multiply the first times the last to get negative 30. Find the factors that add up to the middle. Okay? So, we want to add up to the middle and rewrite them using those numbers. And then do grouping. So, I'm going to group the GCF of 6x squared and 3x is 3x. And that leaves me with 2x minus 1. The GCF of 10x and negative 5 is 5. And that leaves me with 2x minus 1. Whew! Both of these are the same. So that's my new common factor. And when I factor it out, I have 3x plus 5. And I could distribute this to see that I do indeed get 6x squared plus 7x minus 5. All right, so now, this is for the sake of the video, I'm going to show you the same exact problem with a shortcut. We're going to call it factoring by slip and slide. And you use it when you're factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. So our example we're going to do lots of examples, but our first one is going to be the one we just did. 6x squared plus 7x minus 5. So for slip and slide, the first thing you do every time is multiply the first number by the last number. So I'm going to multiply the first number by the last number and get negative 30. Okay, that's first times last, just like I did on the previous problem. And then I'm still going to find the numbers that add up to the middle. The factors of negative 30 that add up to the middle. Now, I'm going to write them out again, but we've already found them. They were negative 3 and positive 10. But this is where it changes. Okay, this is where it changes. I'm going to put add to middle number. Okay, this is where it changes. You're going to put x minus 3, x plus 10. You're going to take those numbers and put them here and here. Then you're going to go back and divide by the first number. Divide by 6. You're going to divide by 6. Because we multiplied by 6 to get that negative 30, we're going to divide by 6. So that gives me x minus 1/2, x plus, if you reduce that, 5/3. But y'all, we never see factors that look like this. So what we do is we take this bottom number and put it in front. So the 2 comes to the front and we have 2x minus 1. The 3 comes to the front and we have 3x plus 5. And that's our solution, just like when we did it by grouping. All right, here's another one. So, is this B or 2? B? All right, so B. 2x squared plus 11x plus 12. Now, guys, something I failed to mention on the last problem. The first thing you would do is look for a GCF. Do 2, 11, and 12 have a GCF? They don't. No. So we're going to proceed, since it's 3 terms, ax squared plus bx plus c, standard form of quadratic, we're going to proceed with slip and slide. So the first step, I multiply 2 times 12 and get 24. I want to know what multiplies to 24 and adds to 11. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. Oh, look, I found it. 3 and 8. There was also 4 and 6, but that didn't work. So, 3 and 8. So I'm going to put those in my parentheses. X plus 3, x plus 8. But what do I have to do now? Well, I multiplied by 2 to begin with, so now I'm going to divide those numbers by 2. 3 halves doesn't reduce, but 8 over 2 reduces to 4. And the last thing we do is bring that 2 to the front. can I check to make sure this is right? I could FOIL it out to check and make sure it's right. No, it's just x plus 4. Because 8 divided by 2 is 4.